Hello, fellow travelers. This is Dr. Gregory Borse, and I want to welcome you to World Lit 2 for Summer Session 1 at UAM in 2020. And I wanted to give you a chance to see me since we are in our isolated areas during the COVID-19 and everything's being offered online. As we begin, I wanted to offer you a short lecture to sort of contextualize the readings that we'll be doing in Shakespeare to begin the semester. So I want to back us up to give you a little bit of a history of Western Europe from the time of the collapse of the Roman Empire until the time that we are going to start our readings in this course. So if you think in terms of the Christ event, Christ's birth, his life, and his death, and the beginning of sort of modern dating for our calendars, over the course of the next 300 years, pagan Rome, saw itself in decline, and at about AD 376 was overrun, kind of marked the end of the dominance of the most powerful civilization in the world up to that point. And from that point forward, from over the next 100 years, from 376 when Rome was overrun by the Goths to about 476, I believe that's the date when the West dispensed with the title emperor. We have great changes that happen in Western Europe. We have a decline in literacy. We have a decline in population. And for about the next 600, 700 years, we have a series of plagues and a loss of a knowledge of almost the entire classical world. In fact, one of the only texts that was preserved in the early Middle Ages were the Bible and Virgil's Aeneid, which is a book that you should have been introduced to in World Lit 1, or you will be if you take World Lit 1 after you take World Lit 2. These were two of the most favorite texts available in the early Middle Ages, but of course not many people could read. Those Middle Ages are split up, generally speaking, into three periods. The early Middle Ages, which went from about 476, 77 to about 1054, and I'll tell you about that date in a minute. And then from about roughly 1054 to 1250, you have what are called the High Middle Ages, and they're followed by the Late Middle Ages, which end about 1500, which is where our course begins. And those were very, very not controversial, but consequential times for Europeans. We have sort of mischaracterized the Middle Ages as an age of nothing but stupidity and superstition and barbarism. It is not. And I recommend highly that you take either British Lit 1 or World Lit 1 to disabuse you of the idea that human beings were not learned in the Middle Ages. They were very, very learned. But one of the things that you notice about Europe during the High Middle Ages and the Late Middle Ages is that the Catholic Church was the institution that held together any semblance of civilization in the western half of the old Roman Empire. Now, by contrast, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which was ruled from Byzantium, which is now Istanbul, never fell or did not fall when the western half did. And so the eastern half remained very, very civilized, very, very high culturally and in its learning during that period when Western Europe had fallen into what we call the Dark Ages. And the church would hold the empire together up until 1054, which is when there was a great schism in the church, and the western half of the Roman Church, which now is seated in Rome, and the eastern half, which is still seated in Istanbul, what's now Istanbul, used to be Constantinople, in the Byzantium Empire. They were one church up to that point. At any rate, I tell you all this so that I can introduce you to three names, which I think become very important conceptually for thinking about the world that we're introduced to when we come to Shakespeare and to the literature that we're going to begin reading in this course. And the three names are these. They are Niccolo Machiavelli, who lived from 1469 to 1527 in Italy, and Martin Luther, 1483.